Kia ora, I'm Rob Thomas, Volunteer Coordinator for Pest Free Kaipatiki. I'm really delighted that we're going to be talking to a number of candidates that are standing for the 2019 local government elections. What is your name?
Yeah, hi Rob. Grant Gillon.
Grant,
pleasure standing for council.
Fantastic. And so do you have any predator traps or bait stations on your property?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, I've got a lovely rat trap, and I actually meant to bring a photo along today of the big rat that I caught earlier this year. Since then, we've been pretty quiet. So
congratulations.
Yeah,
that's good.
Love that peanut
and
butter though.
Have you downloaded the EcoTrack app and are you using that?
Yes, I have, and loading up some weeds on that at the moment. Yeah.
Oh, good to hear. And what do you like or dislike about the natural environment here in Kaipatiki?
Oh, look, Rob, Kaipatiki is wonderful. It's got the second largest native bush cover out of all the board areas, second largest board area in Auckland, and I've walked a lot of them. I know the tracks and the native tree cover, the curry that are there, the birds. It's a wonderful place.
I see you've got the Kauri Hero t-shirt on today, so
yes.
thank you for wearing that. What do you think is the biggest environmental concern for Kaipatiki, and what actions would you take to resolve it?
At the moment, it has to be curry dieback disease, and everybody loves our curry. Just wonderful. We've got some fine specimens in Kaipatiki here, but very threatened by the curry dieback disease. So there's a lot of programs and interventions in play at the moment, and I support those 100%.
Fantastic. What single environmental project have you led or been involved in that you would say has made the biggest impact in Kaipatiki?
I've been involved with a number of Kaipatiki projects over the years, starting in the early 90s with planting around Tough Crater, and been involved in many of the different reserves around. But the one I think that's really special for me is during North Shore City Days, working to get the budget to purchase the Chelsea Park and bring that into the North Shore then portfolio, now the Kaipatiki portfolio. A couple of little disappointments. We wanted the horse paddock to be included into that. There was some budget put aside. Didn't quite happen before amalgamation, and there was some work and discussion with the previous mayor and didn't quite get across the line. That legacy budget still should be there and it needs to be picked up. The other is we did want it to become a regional park, which gives it that little bit extra status and support from region in a way that it's very hard for the local board to put that effort into, and I still think that's a goal that we should work towards.
Well, the volunteers in Chirpa are certainly doing a brilliant job.
Absolutely.
Continuing that work. Kaipatiki is fortunate to have 30% tree canopy cover, and however, every day we can hear the chainsaws in the background. So what is it that you do to maintain or grow Kaipatiki urban canopy cover?
I think there's two issues here. The first is a central government issue, and the previous government changed the Resource Management Act, which made it easier to both remove and heavily prune trees, and that needs to be looked at again because the protection just isn't there. You know, we were told that the protection would remain, but North Shore had done a group protection status for especially our coastal predator koa. Under the Resource Management Act, they had to be individually protected, and that didn't happen to the same extent. So that's now led to a process of a lot less protection, a lot more elimination of trees. But the second thing is a lot more education for the boundary, especially the properties that are boundary onto the SEAs and the bush area, so that people understand when they buy a property, they're not just buying future development, they're actually buying special status. And most people I know that live there respect and preserve that status, but there are others that probably just need to have a little bit of education around it.
Now, Pest Free Kaipatiki is a community-led initiative, and obviously its goals is to become predator-free by 2026. A very ambitious goal. This requires significant coordination and resources to remove those pest plants and predators, of which there are many, and prevent further spread of tree diseases. If you're elected this term, what are the top 3 tangible actions that you can do to support the 30 plus volunteer reserve groups, our schools, our local street coordinators achieve that vision?
Yeah. Unfortunately, only 10% of the total natural environment rate goes to the community groups in coordination and pest free projects, and I think that needs to be changed. Even before the targeted rate went out for public consultation, it was reduced by $60 million over that 10-year period. So we need to refocus as to what's really important in our lives, and I think the pest free status is a very laudable and viable goal. So the first thing we need to do is to actually increase the budget so Kaipatiki gets its fair share. Having so much reserve here means that we should be getting more than just 1/20th of 10% of the targeted rate. And at the moment, we're actually sitting under at 135,000, we're sitting under that. And also there needs to be a lot more assistance for enviro schools. And that was supported by the government until a few years ago. Councils tried to pick that up. But the children at the schools are our future. And if we can assist them and work with them to achieve good environmental values and outcomes, then I think that's really worthwhile.
Great. Both community volunteers and council contractors undertake work in ecological restoration within our reserves. What are your current thoughts on how they coordinate delivery, and what, if any, would you do to change that in the future?
I think the volunteers in our reserves do a magnificent job. I mean, we just wouldn't have the environment that we have without them, and the contractors do a great job as well. Unfortunately, sometimes the coordination just doesn't happen and they slip past each other. And one of the other problems is that there are probably a number of different contractors doing different jobs in the same reserve. So there needs to be a lot more coordination between the contractors and the volunteers, which means the contractors and those that employ them should liaise with the volunteers a lot more, and perhaps ask the volunteers what's their priority in their area, what would they like to see the funds to be spent on, and what projects do they value more. And it might be a little bit different to what the contractors have.
Now, we've got our final 3 questions. They're pretty meaty questions, so we'll get through these and then we'll be finished. Cool. So, Auckland Council recently adopted the draft regional pest management plan. However, many Kaipatiki residents have told us they don't believe it has sufficient teeth when it comes to sort of enforcement on private property to remove those pest plants. We know that seeds and some pest plants can travel more than 500 metres, which is the proposed buffer zone. And obviously that could have real adverse impact to our significant ecological areas. So do you agree or disagree that there's sufficient enforcement? Do you agree with the 500 metre buffer zone? And then what would you do, if anything, to address those issues?
So obviously the 500 metres is not supported by scientific evidence as being sufficient, so that does need to be looked at. There aren't many houses in Kaipatiki that are more than 500 metres away from our precious reserves or bush areas. But the important factor here is I think we need to get over this division where that's public money spent on public land and this is private land, so therefore the council doesn't really get involved. So if we can liaise and educate people so that they are aware of the impact that the weeds and the pests on their property have on the general environment in the bush, then I think we'll actually be able to work a lot more closely and achieve that pest-free status. And it's only little things. It might be when the contractors are working on the bush, allow them to go into private land with the owner's permission, of course, and clear that. Otherwise, they'll keep going back, clear the same piece of bush, and it'll get reseeded again, or the pests come from a compost heap and go in as well. Or it might be a clipping bag or a compost bag left at the gate that the homeowner can fill up and then parks, or somebody can come along and take it away again. And it's just a little bit more liaison and understanding, and a lot of it's personal face-to-face. And most people I know, that live around the bush, they'll be pretty open to those sorts of approaches.
Kauri trees, and we've already talked about your amazing t-shirt you're wearing there, are familiar and beloved by people in Kaipatiki. Obviously they're under threat by kauri dieback. Some people have asserted that the only way to protect kauri trees and from kauri dieback is basically keeping people and animals out of our reserves. What is your opinion on this, and what would you do to protect our kauri?
Well, you're right, Rob. I mean, the kauri are well beloved, I think, by every Kiwi, and I, for one, will take virtually every measure to protect them and stop the kauri dieback disease from spreading. And it's people, footwear, and dogs. Less so, science shows rats and mice and stoats and possums don't spread it the same, but it's the spores in the soil spread by people. So I support the current the project of closing the tracks and then having track diversions around to protect the kauri and of course the cleaning stations, and it's a combined effort. But what disappointed me is that even before the natural environment targeted rate went out for public consultation, council cut it by $65 million over that 3 years. Kaipatiki is not yet getting its fair share. I'm hoping that it will. As the second largest board area with the second largest amount of reserve, and we have spots of kauri that are infected already and others are obviously threatened, we need to move on this quickly. Closing the tracks is the first step. I'm really worried that people who are used to bushwalking or cutting through will now be fed up and start to wander through anyway and ignore what's there. So what we need is more investment in diverting the tracks and building those tracks really quickly, and we can't wait the 5 years that some projects are. We need to get started now and put some resource into it, which means we need not just our fair share, but a resource that is commensurate with the size of the reserve and the number of kauri that we have here in Kaipatiki.
Great, and final question, and the most difficult one of course. Are there any other environmental projects as part of your manifesto that you'd like to tell us about?
Look, there's plenty, and the natural environment we've talked about, the water quality issues in our local board area are huge, and a lot of them are localised, and we are not getting a fair share of our water quality targeted rate. We need some more resource here so that people can swim on our beaches again, including Milford Beach, Takapuna Beach, and there's also problems in Kaipatiki as well. So I will champion a fairer share of the water quality rate to deal with those issues. We should be allowed to swim on our beaches all year round and not just sometimes. I'm very supportive also of the Northwest Wildlife Link, and to be able to go out and have the birds come from Tiri and the islands of the Gulf right through to Waitak, and to stop over in our local board area here is really special. And so we should be putting a lot more resource into native berry trees and bushes to encourage them to stay and linger for just a little bit longer, because we like these sorts of visitors over here. And finally, I'm really pleased at a lot of the community actions that are happening. One in community gardens and organic gardens that are springing up, and most of them formally and approved, and this is just a groundswell from the public, and that's precious. Over in Devonport, where I've been involved with the local board there, the Community Recycling and Reuse Centre is really well valued over there. And that was supported by the board. We got it into community hands last term, I think it was, and it was funded out of the waste targeted rate. And unfortunately what's happened, unbeknownst to us, and I've just found out this year, is that rate has been reducing each year and putting that recycling centre under a lot of pressure, and we don't want to see it go, we don't want to see it fail, we actually want to support it. And we're paying our waste targeted rates, and some of it should be going there to make sure that it goes on. Otherwise, we've got big diesel trucks tramping up and down the peninsula, and we've got people with trailers taking waste somewhere else, and that waste is dumped and not reused and recycled. So there's a lot of value in that. And I'd like to see similar community recycling and reuse stations established elsewhere in our ward area too, and especially Kaipatiki. And I think that'd be of great value to the community.
Well, Grant, we really appreciate your time coming in and joining us today. Appreciate there's some pretty meaty questions in there.
Yes.
And all the very best with your campaign.
Thank you, and all the best with the Pest Free strategy. I know it will.
Cheers. Thanks. Hopefully that worked, is it? Still recording. Yeah, good. 16 minutes.